When the biker's engine cut through the night and she whispered, "Please don't hurt me. I can't move." No one could have guessed that this single moment on an empty road would unravel a violent secret, expose a monster hiding in plain sight, and change two broken lives forever. But that reckoning began hours earlier, long before fear drove her barefoot into the dark. Lila Bennett had learned to measure time by footsteps and moods rather than clocks. She knew the sound of Evan's truck door slamming meant she had seconds to brace herself. And she knew the quiet afterward was always worse than the shouting, because silence meant he was deciding how far he could go this time, without leaving marks he couldn't explain away. And tonight he had gone too far, his rage fueled by jealousy over a text she hadn't even sent, his hands shaking not with remorse but entitlement as he reminded her, again, that no one else wanted her, that she was nothing without him, that she owed him obedience for the roof over her head. The trailer walls had felt like they were closing in as his voice rose, the smell of stale beer and motor oil mixing with her fear, and when his grip tightened on her wrist and pain shot up her arm, something inside her finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty that if she stayed, she would not survive the night. She didn't scream, didn't fight, just waited for the split second when he turned away, then bolted for the door, the screen ripping loose as she shoved through it, the humid air hitting her lungs like freedom and terror combined, her feet hitting gravel as she ran without shoes, without a plan, without anything but the instinct to live. Behind her, Evan's shout ripped through the night, promising punishment, promising regret, promising that she would pay. But Lila ran anyway, past darkened trailers and rusted fences, past the last flickering streetlight, onto Old Mill Road where the pavement cracked and the town disappeared, her breath coming in ragged gasps as her ribs screamed in protest, and her vision blurred with tears she refused to stop for. She stumbled more than once, catching herself on shaking hands, the skin of her palms tearing open, but the thought of stopping felt worse than the pain, because stopping meant him, and she had already spent too many nights convincing herself that tomorrow would be different. The road stretched empty in both directions, trees pressing in close, the night alive with insects and distant thunder, and when her legs finally betrayed her, it happened without warning, her body folding to the ground near the shoulder as if it had simply run out of permission to keep going. She curled onto her side, instinctively protecting her head and stomach, every nerve on fire, her wrists swelling rapidly, her ribs aching with each shallow breath, and in that moment, alone and exposed, fear flooded in stronger than before, because she knew Evan would come looking, knew he would tell anyone who asked that she was unstable, dramatic, that she needed to be brought home. Headlights appeared in the distance, just one at first, then resolving into the unmistakable shape of a motorcycle cutting through the dark, its engine low and powerful, vibrating the ground beneath her, and panic spiked so hard it made her dizzy, because a stranger on an empty road felt just as dangerous as the man she was running from. She tried to push herself up and failed, pain stealing the strength from her arms, and when the bike slowed and stopped nearby, when boots hit pavement and a tall shadow moved toward her, every story she'd ever heard about bad men and worse nights screamed through her head, forcing the words out of her mouth before she could stop them. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice breaking as she pressed her forehead to the asphalt, humiliation and terror blending together. "I can't move." For a heartbeat, nothing happened, and she was sure she had made a terrible mistake, but then something warm settled over her. Shoulders, heavy and protective, the smell of leather and road dust replacing the cold night air, and a voice spoke, not sharp, not angry, but steady, almost careful. "Hey," the stranger said quietly, as if loudness itself might frighten her further. "I'm not here to hurt you." She dared to lift her head, just enough to see him, tall, broad, bearded, his arms marked with faded tattoos that spoke of hard choices and harder years, his motorcycle idling behind him like a restrained animal, and yet his eyes, when they met hers, held concern rather than judgment. "My name's Caleb," he said, kneeling slowly so she wouldn't feel cornered. "And you're hurt. I need you to tell me where it hurts the most." The words hit her harder than any blow, because no one had asked her that in a long time, not without accusation or expectation attached, and her body betrayed her by shaking as the reality of safety, temporary as it might be, crashed over her. She tried to speak and failed, a sob tearing free instead, and Caleb didn't rush her, didn't touch her again without permission, just stayed there, grounded and solid, a presence between her and the dark road behind her, while far away, an engine roared to life. Too familiar, too close, reminding her that running had consequences and that whatever happened next would change everything. The man on the motorcycle did not move when the distant engine roared again. Instead, he shifted his body just enough to block her view of the road behind them, as if placing himself between Lila Bennett and whatever was coming. And in that small, deliberate motion, something inside her loosened even as fear tightened its grip. Caleb kept his voice calm, asking simple questions the way someone trained for emergencies would. Her name, whether she could feel her fingers, whether the pain in her ribs spiked when she breathed in. And though every answer hurt to give, it grounded her in the present, in the fact that someone was finally paying attention to what she felt instead of what she owed. He moved with practiced care, sliding a small flashlight from his saddleback, checking her pupils, assessing the unnatural angle of her wrist, and when she flinched, he stopped instantly, lifting his hands to show he would go no further without her consent, a courtesy so foreign it made her chest ache in a new way. "You're doing great," he told her quietly, not like a compliment, but like a statement of fact, and the words echoed in her mind because no one had called her strong in years, only difficult, needy, dramatic. The other engine grew louder now, tires chewing gravel somewhere up the road, and Lila's breath caught as she whispered, "That's him." The confession tumbling out with shame attached, as if being hunted were somehow her fault. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his tone never rose when he asked, "Your boyfriend?" She nodded, tears burning, and the silence that followed felt heavy, charged, like the air before a storm breaks. Caleb stood slowly, deliberately, placing himself fully between her and the road, his broad back filling her vision as the headlights swung closer, illuminating the cracked asphalt, the trees, the truth she could no longer hide. The pickup rolled to a stop several yards away, engine rumbling aggressively, and when the driver's door flew open, Lila's whole body tensed, her muscles preparing for impact out of pure habit, because she knew his footsteps, knew the rhythm of his anger, knew how quickly words would turn into hands. "There you are," Evan shouted, his voice thick with false concern and real fury, eyes darting from her to Caleb and back again, calculating. "Baby, what are you doing out here? You scared me." The lie was almost convincing, and Lila hated herself for the flicker of doubt it stirred, the instinct to smooth things over even now. But Caleb did not step aside, did not respond with threats or bravado, only said evenly, "She's hurt. You need to back up." Evan laughed, sharp and humorless, pointing at Caleb's bike, at his tattoos. "Mind your business, man. This is between me and my girlfriend." The word landed like a chain snapping shut, but Caleb didn't flinch. "If she wants to go with you," he said calmly, "she can tell me herself." Silence stretched, broken only by the idling engines and Lila's shallow breathing. And in that moment, Evan's confidence faltered because predators rely on fear and isolation, and Caleb was offering neither. Evan took a step forward anyway, his gaze sliding toward Lila with a warning she knew too well, but Caleb matched the movement without touching him, his presence in a movable line. "Don't," Caleb said, softly but with an edge that carried weight, the kind that came from experience rather than bravado, and something in Evan's eyes changed as he recognized it. The stare down lasted seconds that felt like minutes, and then, with a muttered curse and a sneer about crazy women and white knights, Evan turned back toward his truck, spinning gravel as he peeled away into the dark, his taillights disappearing faster than Lila had dared hope. Only then did Caleb kneel again, the tension easing from his shoulders as if he'd set down a heavy load, and Lila realized she was crying in earnest now, not from pain, but from the shock of having someone stand between her and harm without asking for anything in return. Caleb spoke again, gentler still, telling her the ambulance was already on the way, that he'd called the moment he assessed her injuries, that she was not going back with Evan tonight or any night if she didn't want to, and each sentence felt like a door unlocking in her mind, revealing choices she'd been told didn't exist. As sirens grew in the distance, Caleb stayed focused on her, talking her through breathing exercises to keep her ribs from tightening, explaining what the paramedics would do when they arrived so nothing would surprise her, and when she apologized, because apologizing had become her reflex, he stopped her with a quiet shake of his head. "You don't apologize for surviving," he said simply, and the conviction in his voice made her believe him. The flashing red and blue lights finally cut through the darkness, bathing the road in harsh color, and as the paramedics took over, Lila's hand searched blindly for Caleb's sleeve, finding it and clinging, not because she was weak, but because she had learned, in the span of one terrifying night, that strength sometimes meant accepting help. Caleb let her hold on, answering questions, giving a clear, concise account of what he'd found and what he'd done, his calm authority earning nods of approval. And when they lifted her onto the stretcher, she caught his eye again, panic flaring at the thought of being alone in a hospital room where Evan might appear with apologies and flowers and promises. "Will you stay?" she asked, the question barely audible over the noise, and Caleb didn't hesitate. "As long as you want me to," he replied, and the certainty of that promise followed her into the ambulance, settling deep in her chest as the doors closed and the road carried them away from the night she'd finally outrun. By the time morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, Lila understood that the most dangerous part of her night wasn't the running or the pain or even the confrontation on the road. It was the quiet afterward, when doubt crept in and tried to convince her she had imagined the kindness, that safety was temporary and fear was permanent. She lay stiff in the narrow bed, her wrist wrapped and her ribs bandaged, listening to the soft beeping of monitors and the distant shuffle of nurses' shoes, bracing herself for the moment the door would open and Evan would appear with that familiar mixture of apology and accusation. But the door opened to reveal Caleb instead, seated in the chair beside her bed, his jacket folded neatly across his lap, eyes closed, head tipped back against the wall like a man who hadn't slept but refused to leave. The sight of him there cracked something open in her chest, a release she hadn't allowed herself. And when he stirred and noticed she was awake, his first question wasn't about paperwork or explanations but simply, "How's the pain?" The simplicity of it grounded her, and she answered honestly, surprised to find that honesty felt easier now. Over the next hours, as doctors came and went and a social worker gently asked questions about her home life, Caleb stayed quiet unless Lila looked to him, letting her lead, letting her speak for herself, and each time she did, the words came stronger, steadier, as if her voice had been waiting for permission to exist. When she finally admitted, out loud, that she was afraid to go back, the room didn't collapse around her as she'd always feared. Instead, the social worker nodded, options were discussed, numbers were written down, and the future, once a locked door, cracked open just enough to let light through. Caleb didn't promise to fix everything, didn't offer dramatic vows or reckless heroics. He offered something quieter and far more powerful: consistency. He drove her to a small shelter later that afternoon, helped her carry a single borrowed bag inside, and waited in the lobby while she spoke privately with an advocate, respecting boundaries even when it meant stepping back. Over the next days, he checked in without hovering, brought her meals when she was too tired to face a cafeteria, and taught her how to sit with the discomfort of change without running back to what was familiar just because it was known. Lila discovered that healing wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork and hard conversations and learning to sleep without listening for footsteps. It was waking up in a safe room and realizing your body didn't know how to relax yet, and that was okay. One evening, sitting on a bench outside the shelter, she finally asked Caleb why he'd stopped that night, why he'd risked involvement when it would have been easier to ride past. He didn't answer right away, watching the sky darken instead, then told her about a younger version of himself who'd believed toughness meant silence, who'd stood by while people he loved endured things they shouldn't have, and how he'd learned too late that looking away carried its own kind of guilt. "I can't change who I was," he said quietly, "but I can choose who I am when I see someone hurting now." The words settled into her in a way nothing else had, not as a lesson, but as permission. Weeks passed, and Lila's cast came off, her bruises faded, and her steps grew steadier, not just physically but emotionally. She attended counseling, filed a report, and learned to say Evan's name without shrinking. One afternoon, as she signed the lease for a small apartment of her own, her hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of choosing herself. Caleb waited outside, leaning against his bike, giving her space, and when she emerged holding the keys like they might vanish, he smiled, not triumphantly, but with quiet pride. "You did this," he said, and for once, she didn't argue. That night, standing in the doorway of her empty living room with nothing but a borrowed chair and a box of donated dishes, Lila felt the echo of loneliness rise, familiar and tempting, but it didn't win. She knew now that strength wasn't about never needing help. It was about recognizing when you deserved it. As Caleb rode away later, the sound of his engine fading into the distance, Lila realized the moment on the road hadn't saved her life. Her decision to keep choosing safety had. The biker hadn't been her rescuer in the way stories like to tell it. He'd been a witness, a shield when she needed one, and proof that not everyone who looks dangerous is. And as she locked her door for the first time, alone but not afraid, she understood that the hearts that melted that night weren't just his or the strangers who would hear her story someday. They were hers too, softening around a future she finally believed she was allowed to have.